AskReddit. Redditors who have worked around death burial, what's your best ghost story? Number 1. I work as a first responder, so very close proximity to death. I had not had many ghost encounters on the job. I would say that this is more of a paranormal spirit story. I was working overtime on a different crew than my usual one, when we were paged to a very bad MVA. It was a truck full of people that had been hit head-on by one of those huge crane trucks. There were multiple fatalities, one of them being a younger kid that we ended up having to extricate and perform CPR on. He unfortunately did not make it and was pronounced on scene. After the scene was wrapping up with 3 patients being transported by ambulance and 1 by air ambulance. We were waiting for the coroner to come and get the kid that didn't make it. We had put a sheet over him. Take into account this was a super warm summer day with no air movement, not a hint of a breeze. Myself and the rest of the crew look over and saw the sheet that had been placed over the young kid begin to lift up several inches into the air like his body was pushing it up and then settled back onto him, like air was escaping. To this day we all are sure we witnessed a soul leaving a body. Number 2. I don't work in healthcare, but my mom and several other relatives do. Not counting my mom, the other doctors in my family are really skeptical people. When my grandfather died from cancer and black lung in the 90s, nearly all of my family members swore they saw him walking down the hallway and around the corner in his usual clothes, so not in a hospital gown. My uncle was the only one that followed and caught up in time to see elevator doors close. The elevator was across from the nurse's station, so he walked over to them to see if they saw anything. They said no and asked what he saw. He just said that he thought a man walked into the elevator as the doors had just closed, and they kind of laughed and said, "Oh honey, those elevators are messed up. They do that all the time on their own." For the next 20-ish years, most of my family have had encounters with my grandfather. My mom's house would frequently fill with an unbearable smell of cigarettes. Nobody in my house smoked, there were only 3 of us, and we lived in a very remote area with no close neighbors. My grandfather smoked, of course, so we always assumed it was him hanging around the house. My other family members would also strongly smell other things associated with him: baking bread, celery fennel, and other ingredients he would make sausage with, the wine and the smell of the cellar he would make it in. There was never an explanation for those smells every time it would happen. My cousin, when he was super young, would also claim that my grandfather would stop by and talk to him. He would occasionally introduce him to other family members that had long since passed away well before any of us were born. He knew of a great uncle that had been killed at sea during WW2. He knew so much about him that only my older relatives could verify. Like that he played guitar in Chicago. Oddly enough, I found a wooden guitar while cleaning out my grandmother's house a few summers ago, and it had been manufactured in Chicago. My cousin also talked about how funny this uncle was, and we caught him dying laughing by himself on more than one occasion. When asked what was so funny, he would just say that uncle's name is being silly. The only thing that I ever really knew about this relative was that he was the funny one in the family. They all had a great sense of humor, but apparently this uncle was on another level. It really broke the family when they received word that he was killed. He was buried at sea, so they never even got to properly say bye to him. When my grandmother passed away in 2018, all of the encounters with my grandfather just stopped for everyone. It was pretty sad. Some of them found comfort in thinking he was still hanging around. Him and my grandmother had been married since they were teenagers. I think he was definitely waiting on her before he moved on. There haven't been any unexplainable stories shared since 2018. It almost feels like we really lost everyone back then. But there's an enormous comfort in knowing that they all moved on with each other. Number 3. Here's a story I have literally only told a few people. Weirdest thing in my life. I am a funeral celebrant, training to be a family celebrant, so weddings and funerals, but this involves my own mother. My mom had cancer, but I was called home as she was dying in September 2020. We didn't leave her alone for a second, so when it got to like 1 a.m. my dad told me to go to bed for a bit and he'd sit with her. A few hours later I felt this horrendous pain rip through my torso, lungs, chest. Never felt anything like it. It felt like I was suffocating, drowning. Didn't last very long, but I couldn't move. A few minutes later, my dad came to my room and told me Mom had died. I 100% believe I felt her final pain of death. Her bed was directly below my bed in my room. In fact, I was almost directly over her as she died. She had cancer, but died of pulmonary edema, fluid on the lungs, and lack of oxygen. Never felt anything else like it, but I've heard so many similar stories. And I know it sounds like I'm making it up, but why would I? Oh, and it's one reason I became a celebrant. I didn't fully before, but now I completely believe in soul spirit energy returning to the universe, animating force, whatever you want to call it. It was a good thing to learn amidst the grief. There's for sure more to this life than our physical bodies. Edit. I have often wondered if it was a panic attack, or something like heartburn, or just simply some psychosomatic grief reaction. It may have been. But I've had a panic attack and heartburn before, and it was a different sensation. Number 4. When I was young, let's say around 8 or 9, I had an unusual experience. One night, as I lay asleep in bed, I hear an RC toy car start zipping around my bedroom. I figured it was probably my older brother just messing with me, but he was adamant it was not him. Okay, whatever. The next day I took pains to hide the remote where no one could find it, behind some insulation in a room my parents were remodeling. Sure enough, about the same time the next night, that little car starts jetting back and forth and actually starts running into the door. I was certain it was my brother, so I sprung the door open to emptiness. I peeked into my brother's room only to find him fast asleep. The car? It had gone into the unfinished room and was idling in the middle of the room. Okay, now I'm freaked out. Third night, I removed the battery from both the remote and the car itself. Tested it. No way was it moving with both batteries taken out. I was certain nothing would come again the next night. Wrong. Same ritual of hiding the batteryless remote, this time in the shed out back. Almost the exact same time that night, that little fucker starts zipping around my bedroom again. So, I did what any sensible 8-year-old would do and smashed the bejesus out of the car. Number 5. Not my story, but one of my law professors. The professor taught torts and insurance law. In insurance, there's this idea of an insurance interest. Or means that in order to take out a policy on someone something, you have to have some kind of connection to them. That means you want them safe. Life insurance. Need to have some kind of relation to the person that makes them more valuable to you alive than dead, is the short version. Parent, child, employer. The specifics are outlined in your country state's insurance code. Importantly, uncle is not on that list by default. Deadbeat and his wife are looking for some easy money. Deadbeat and wife live together with his mom, brother, and nephew. Nephew loves to play baseball. Wife has an idea. Great idea. She hates her in-laws, and deadbeat doesn't have a single cell rattling around his skull, apparently. So deadbeat goes to the local insurance agent, friend of the family. Takes out a life insurance policy on nephew, payable to deadbeat. Insurance agent signs off on it because he knows the family. Deadbeat and wife pack up all their stuff from the house and put it in their cars. They wait until brother goes to work. Time to get to work. Deadbeat goes to his sleeping nephew and stabs him to death. Wife stabs grandma to death in her chair. They douse the place in gasoline and light up the house. Investigators put it all together pretty easily, considering deadbeat and wife still have all their stuff conveniently packed up in their cars. Those two idiots are still in jail as far as I know. My professor gets involved in the story because brother is suing the insurance company for writing the policy that got his son killed. Insurance company says to him, well, the contract says it pays out X, so we'll pay you X. Professor is on the phone and says, friend, we aren't suing you under the contract. We are suing in negligence. We would like all of your money. Negotiations were short, meaning they take months instead of years. Professor is taking a stroll one evening, talking to the insurance company's lawyer on the phone. Conversation ends, he hangs up. Baseball falls out of a tree next to him. Nephew loved baseball. It's the anniversary of nephew's death. Some things are just too creepy to make up. Number 6. Only really weird thing that happened in an EMI nursing home was on this one rooms that we tried to keep for the palliative care patients near the nurse's station. We had an old boy who passed away. He had dementia and whilst with us was very resistant to personal care. He was a big guy and doubly incontinent, so we would unfortunately have to support best we could to meet his needs. He would yell at us the whole time, "Bugger off. Bugger off," during any personal care we gave him. Sadly, he passed away and the room remained empty for a few months. I recall I went in after the previous shift had laid him out waiting for the coroner and complained massively that no one had opened the window to let the spirit out, a superstition you will find in a lot of homes. Weeks later we had a new lady come in who was quite demanding, and so we moved her closer to the nursing station in the palliative care room because she was like a ninja with a frame and would zip off and hit other residents. We put her in the old boy's room who she never knew about, and with it being a good 5 months since Ken had left and losing others in between, no one really mentioned him anymore. In her new room she became instantly hostile, shouting, "Get him out! Get out! Get out!" This isn't unusual for advanced dementia for people to have visual hallucinations, but we did ask her who she wanted to get out. She said, "That big man sitting in the corner. He keeps telling me to bugger off. You bugger off out of my room." And she continued to have an argument with the guy who wasn't there who kept telling her to bugger off. It took us all back a bit but kept reassuring her there was no one there. After a week she would not settle and we had to move her to a different room where she was then fine. Number 7. Mine is actually really wholesome. I worked with a family who lost their 30-year-old daughter unexpectedly, and when I went to take a lock of her hair for her mom, I was really struck by this strong scent of sweet artificial grape, which must have been from her shampoo because even after I washed the hair I had cut with different shampoo, it still smelled like grape. For the whole week that her body ashes were in my care, I would randomly smell that scent pretty much every time I picked up her file. I figured that it was just coincidence, because the lock of hair was with the file, although it was sealed in a Ziploc bag, which was tucked inside a fairly thick cardboard folder. But then when I went to put her ashes in the urn, I could smell it again, even though the file and lock of hair were on the other side of the funeral home. I mentioned it to her parents when they came to pick up the urn, and they laughed and told me that the grape scent was her favorite shampoo body wash, and she was probably hanging out because she would have been very curious, interested in my job and what I do. So far, so kinda boring, right? The interesting wholesome part of this story is that a few months later I worked with another family who lost their 20-year-old daughter in very similar circumstances, and her family happened to order almost the exact same urn. That week, I kept smelling something sweet, and it would start to trigger a memory but then disappear before I could remember where I had smelled it before. When the urn came in, I opened the box, and it was like being punched in the face with grape shampoo, and I suddenly realized what I had been smelling all week. I was like, OH, its input name. It was the same thing as before every time I handled the file, grape shampoo. When I went to transfer the ashes into the urn, grape shampoo. Every time I handled the urn before giving it to her parents, grape shampoo. I like to joke that I've handled so many dead bodies that I'm immune to ghosts, because I never have spooky or supernatural experiences, yet I'm also 100% certain that that girl with the grape shampoo made a point of coming back to let me know that she was going to take care of the younger one, and I told her parents as much when they came to pick up her urn. I haven't smelled grape shampoo since. Number 8. Years ago when I was still in medical school, I was in the anatomy lab studying for an exam the next day. The doctor in charge of anatomy was an old family friend, and I got permission to stay there after hours. This was the 3rd day of exams, and I was pretty tired at this point. Whenever I got too sleepy, I'd sing a bit for a few minutes to keep myself awake, and the acoustics of the lab was like a bathroom, so I liked to sing there. I loved to sing 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton. When I got to the chorus part, if I could fall into the sky, do you think time would pass me by? 'Cause you know I'd walk 1,000 miles if I could just see you, then I swear I heard the cadaver in the corner groan tonight. This wasn't fucking gas escaping. I know y'all are gonna say that, since it was a pretty old and leathery body, and we had already dissected the abdominal cavity weeks ago. I fucking took off after hearing that. Didn't stay in the lab unless there were others with me after that. Number 9. I used to clean up crime scenes. Can't really think of anything paranormal happening, but the space where a person died often carried a heavy energy. Depending on the scope of the job, you might spend hours, days, or even weeks in that person's home sorting through their belongings. My coworkers and I would sometimes feel really close to the deceased, as if we had known them. So sometimes we would sort of talk to them. For example, if I ever had a weird feeling about a place or felt bad energy, I would talk to them out loud and let them know I was just here to help, not haphazardly rummage through their personal items. One coworker would often shout at them if he found something he didn't want to find. Like if there was more damage caused to the home than we expected, he would shout something like, "What the fuck, Derek?" Since we were wearing 2 or more pairs of gloves and a full suit at all times and were often moving very bulky and heavy pieces of furniture, small accidents were pretty much inevitable. I would always apologize out loud when they happened, using their name. I thought it was important to respect the space even if the family wasn't going to step foot inside ever again. I felt that the way we handled the situation would affect the next person moving in. To me, was almost as if we weren't just cleaning, we were helping the home get rid of any bad energy associated with whatever had happened there. Number 10. I actually grew up in a cemetery. That usually throws people off when I say that, but I was the grandson of the local sexton of the cemetery. I won't say where, because frankly, I don't want people to go there. I will say that it's built into the side of a butte, and is somewhere in the mountain west of the U.S. As a kid, I didn't experience a whole lot. My grandpa claims that occasionally when I was in the playpen and he was working on a grave I would talk to someone. At around 2 to 3 years old. My grandpa claims to have seen some stuff, but he was always vague. I think he thought it was just for him to have seen. As a teen, I got interested in those serious questions, like what happens if we die and what happens to the soul if we have one. Being a teenage on the edge of being a full-blown atheist, whose only exposure to spirituality was the spiritual death that is the Mormon Church, I had some things I wanted to know. So I took a few friends and hung out at this massive cemetery I grew up in the middle of nowhere trying to talk to dead people. I still work there on occasion during the summer with Granddad. These experiences take place from around 2006 to 2012. One night I was in a section with a couple other people, towards the front entrance. This section is where they bury children. Kids younger than 10, the plots are smaller. I just had a feeling, so we stayed. After a few minutes, I heard the sound of kids' feet running through the grass, and kids giggling, as if they were playing. I then felt something touch my hand, like something grabbing my pointer finger and holding it. I saw what looked like the shadow of a person standing next to a big tree. It was shifting back and forth on its feet, and it looked like a man. My friend spotted it and asked it to come closer. It did. All of a sudden, loud footsteps were upon us, and in a panic, we booked it out of there as fast as possible. There's quite a few more that I can talk about. But that's just a few. Anyway, I don't really give a shit if someone believes me or not, and I'm not much of an atheist these days. Thank you for watching and listening to this video. If you would, go ahead and give that like button a smack and the subscribe button a smash for more videos. Smack and smash. See ya.